My mother's lock. My mother took a kitchen knife and hacked my father and Alex's grandmother to death. My mother has confessed all the crimes. But the police still hold on to me. They asked me over and over again, "What did you see? What did you hear? What did you do?" My hands were shaking, and I looked at the police who were interrogating me with hatred. I gritted my teeth and tried my best to control my emotions. I don't understand why they must listen to me. Why must I say it myself? How can a woman have the strength to hack a strong man to death? And one hack. Two? The man looked like an iron-faced and impartial person. And every chill made people feel cold all over. Your mother confessed so readily? The water meter can not only calculate the water fee, but also record the time of water use, which can be accurate to the second. The sound of water flowing suddenly came into my mind, gurgling. This formed a strong contrast with the sound of dripping blood, tick tick tick. Alex, is your mother taking the blame for you? This is clearly a question. But the man said it with the flavor of a declarative sentence. In your mother's confession, when she swung the knife to cut people, your water meter was moving. She said you were not at the scene at that time. So I have been silent for too long. Since the incident, I have not spoken a word. Everyone thought I was scared silly. But in fact, it was my mother who specifically asked me not to talk. Because if you talk too much, there will always be loopholes. But at this moment, I couldn't bear it anymore. I looked up and looked at the policeman, and asked calmly, "Should I explain? Question: Can it prove that my mother killed the person?" The police waited for me to speak for a long time. When they heard me speak, they couldn't help but relax. But when they heard this, their expressions became more serious. I told them, my parents have a bad relationship. Since I can remember, they often fight. When it gets serious, they will shout and kill. Maybe this time it was too much. My mother went to the kitchen and took a knife to chop my father in anger. My grandmother Alex must have wanted to save her son. Maybe my mother was so angry that she chopped him to death. I believe my mother also told the police this. The interrogator and the person who took the statement looked at each other and asked in confusion, "Maybe? Didn't you see what happened?" I shook my head and said, "I'm going to college soon. I did well in the exam. But I'm away from home. It was too far. And my father didn't want to support me. So I worked as a tutor outside to earn tuition. That student's family went out to play that day. But they didn't tell me. So I came back early. Who knew? When I opened the door, my mother was hacking them. My father was covered in blood and lying on the ground without the ability to fight back. My grandma Alex was also hacked several times. But she still wanted to rush over to block the knife for my father. My mother was so angry that she kicked her away, and her blood splashed on my face. Speaking of this, I couldn't help but sigh repeatedly, and said with some emotion, "My grandma Alex was very good to me. My family was very poor when I was a child. But she still let me live and took care of me and raised me with great difficulty." My mother finally stopped her killing spree. And she was breathing heavily. She cried to me. "It was them. They are not human. They. Don't blame me. Don't blame me. Mom was forced to do this." My mother pointed at the door and shouted at me. "Go away. Go away quickly. And pretend you didn't see anything." I hesitated for a second and said nothing. My grandmother Alex tried her best to grab my trouser legs. But I dodged. I walked into the house as if nothing had happened. Went into the bathroom, and turned on the faucet to wash the blood off my face. At first, no matter how loud the water flow was, it couldn't cover their wailing. Slowly, nothing could be heard. I waited until there was no sound outside before turning off the faucet and coming out. Dad was dead. Grandma Alex was dead. Mom threw away the kitchen knife. There was a lot of blood. Looking around, there was blood everywhere. At this time, footsteps were heard downstairs. My mother immediately cheered up and ordered me, "Call the police. Call the police quickly. If others call the police first, it will implicate you." Then, I called the police. I looked up at them. And it was obvious that they didn't believe it. You saw your mother/your father and your grandmother Alex. But not only did you not stop them, you also went to the bathroom to wash the blood off your face as if nothing had happened? I nodded in confirmation and asked, "What crime have I committed? The crime of not saving someone from death?" I asked curiously. Suppose I said that I was so scared at the time that I had no idea what to do and I went to the bathroom to wash my face. Would the police not pursue my crime of inaction? I sighed helplessly. Actually, I'm in a dilemma. My father and grandmother Alex were killed. And my mother killed them. My hands are made of flesh. Whatever I say or don't say is equivalent to someone sawing my flesh with a saw. I asked in confusion. Why do you have to listen to me? I'm just a kid who just finished the college entrance examination. Aren't you worried that I'll have some psychological problems if I witness such a thing with my own eyes? Just because I'm an adult and over 18 years old, do I no longer need to be protected? Is there such a big difference between the day before and the day after turning 18? I even felt a little hateful. Hate all of them. If I had known this, why didn't it happen earlier? At least, as a minor, I can get away with it without having to accept endless interrogation by the police. 3. Maybe I was too calm. The police who interrogated me looked at me more and more sharply. Do you look frightened? I replied. Do I have to be crazy to be considered overstimulated? Someone died. Someone admitted to murder. Can't the police close the case quickly? Those who need to deal with the aftermath should deal with the aftermath. And those who need to be tried should go to court. I don't have much time left. In half a month, I will report to the university. Hearing me say this, the policeman was furious. Even though he deliberately controlled his emotions, he still slapped the table in dissatisfaction, making a dull sound. Do you know who died? Do you know who killed the person? They are all your loved ones. How can you say such cold words? I asked infuriately. Then what do you want me to say? Say my father is guilty of a heinous crime. Deserves death. Deserves death. Or say my mother is a murderer, and you should shoot her earlier? My face was numb. I clearly didn't want to say anything. And I shouldn't say anything. But you insisted on me saying it? I said it. But you didn't believe it. You think I'm cold? Then aren't you cold? If I was crying my heart out right now, what would you think of me? You would probably think that since I'm an adult and still crying like a child, there must be something going on, right? I mocked them. They seemed to have no words to refute. So they had to change the subject and asked. I heard that your father has a tendency to domestic violence and often beats your mother. Is this true? For it's so true. But they had to come to me to confirm it again. It's really interesting. It's true. My mother often has new wounds on her body. And new wounds cover old wounds. I said. These neighbors all know about it. If you don't believe it, roll up her sleeves and take a look. The bruises from the last fight should not have disappeared yet. The police asked in surprise. You know all this? Of course I know. I was also surprised. Why did they think I didn't know? If I didn't know, who would help her clean her wounds? Who would help her apply medicine? Who could send her to the hospital in time, when she was dying? Hearing this, several policemen were really uncomfortable. They wanted to say something, but they couldn't say it. Finally, they asked with a hint of accusation, "You are so tall. When your father started to fight, didn't you know to stop him?" Stop him? How could I stop him? I wasn't born this tall. When I was very young, I tried to stop him. But my father kicked me away. My mother could have resisted, escaped, and hidden, as soon as I went over. My mother was like a hen with wings spread out, holding me tightly in her arms. Then, she just stood there motionless, letting my father punch and kick her. When I grew up a little and became more sensible, every time my father beat her, she would close the door herself to prevent me from seeing. My grandmother Alex also covered my eyes and said to me, "Your mother made a mistake. And your father was teaching her a lesson. If you make a mistake, you should be beaten. Didn't your school teacher teach you that? When I finally had my own sense of right and wrong, and I was taller than my mother, I could also open my arms like her and stand in front of my father. I shouted at him, "Don't hit my mother. If you hit my mother again, I will beat you to death." This trick worked. Then, I didn't see my father beat my mother again. I could only see the scars on her body and her tears. I chased him to the place where he was playing cards with a stick, and I beat him with the stick without saying a word. I was not afraid of his pain at all. Several adults came to pull me away but couldn't. I beat him until his head was broken and bloody. I think he will never dare to do it again. But guess what happened? My mother knelt at the door of the room and begged him for 3 days and 3 nights before he gave me the household registration booklet as alms. Otherwise, I couldn't even finish high school. 5. I called the police. But what can the police do? He was so powerful that he was not afraid of the police. He shouted at the top of his voice, "I beat my own wife. And you care?" I crawled into her bed. "And you care?" The police didn't want to say more to this scoundrel. So they asked my mother, "Are you going to get a medical examination?" My mother didn't understand. The police said, "As long as the injury report is identified as a minor injury, he can go to jail." My grandmother Alex was so scared that she waved her hands and said, "What do you mean by jail or not? I have never seen anyone go to jail for beating his wife. If he goes to jail, who will support me?" He pointed at the police and asked, "Do you care about me? Or do you care about me? If you want to arrest my son, I will go to your house to eat, drink, defecate and urinate." Which woman would let her husband go to jail if he was beaten a few times by her own man? My grandmother Alex pointed at my mother and cursed, "You are really a disaster. What good will it do you to put your man in jail? It will make it easier for you to cheat, right?" More and more people came to watch the fun. But none of them was useful. In the end, the police would say, "You don't want to go to the hospital for a checkup, right? Then we can't care. You should solve your own family affairs by yourselves. Don't always waste police force." Then what? Behind the door, my father beat my mother again. This time they all learned their lesson. My father didn't hit my mother's face. My mother also endured and didn't say anything, looking at my face full of hatred. My father would smile at me, a very weird smile. He dragged my mother in front of me and ordered her, "Look at your son's eyes. This is the good son you gave birth to and the good son you taught. He dared to look at me like this today. And he will dare to look at you like this in the future." He would pat my face and say, "Son, you are still young now. You don't understand. Women are all mean. If you don't beat her, she won't obey." He also said proudly, "Beating is love. Scolding is love. No beating. No scolding. No love." He asked my mother to reason with me. And my mother said to me earnestly, "Xiao Zhang, your father just has a bad temper. Mom just needs to be a little bit accommodating. You should study hard and don't worry about these things." Later, I went to live in the school. Even if she kept everything from me, I knew that she was beaten again. I said to my mother, "You divorce me, I'll go with you." My mother shook her head and said, "Be patient. Study hard. And wait until you get into college." 6. Those painful past events are like nails in my head. If I don't think about it, it's fine. But once I think about it, it's really painful. I whispered, "I'm used to it. I got used to it a long time ago." I sighed one after another. I don't have any hope. I can only bury my head and study. I want to go to college. Only when I get into college can I take my mother away and stay away from bad people. I unconsciously raised my hand to wipe my face. My hand was wet. I realized that I was crying. 7. So, I was not surprised at all that my mother hacked my father to death. I believe that she must have hacked him thousands of times in her mind, so that she would not hesitate when she held the knife. You ask me why I am so indifferent? Because if I am not indifferent, as long as my father finds a chance to fight back, my mother will be the one who dies. The police thought for a while and asked, "Your mother has been patient for so long. How come she suddenly couldn't bear it when she saw you going to college? Assuming that she has been waiting for you to enter college and then divorce. She should have asked your father for a divorce the moment you were admitted to college. Why didn't she ask for it? She should have received the college admission letter a long time ago. She didn't ask for a divorce. Instead, she killed your father and Alex's grandmother at this time. It seems unreasonable to justify the motive of murder as domestic violence. After all, your father's domestic violence is not the first time." Domestic violence? Domestic violence alone? Not the first time? Look. What a cold person. He summarized the misfortune of others' lives with just the word, domestic violence. How do I know this? My mother didn't have time to tell me. In the interrogation room. Didn't she tell you? Faced with my continuous questioning, the police hesitated for a moment. And then said, "Your mother said that during lunch. Your father complained that the food was too salty and tried to hit her. So she went to the kitchen to get a knife in anger." I continued to ask, "You don't believe it?" The police were speechless again. They are so persistent. There must be doubts in the case. But I can't figure out where the specific doubts are. Take a break. The interrogating police stood up and said. I asked, "Can't I leave? Where are the bodies of my father and Alex's grandmother now? Don't I need to prepare for the burial? Their bodies are still with the medical examiner. When they can be taken away depends on the development of the case." I asked again, "What about my mother? She still needs to be interrogated. What about me?" "Wait a minute. We have something to ask you later." In short, they would not let me go. About 2 hours passed. They continued to interrogate me and said, "We just met some of your neighbors. They can all prove that your father often abuses your mother. But they also said that it is because your mother cheated on her that your father is like this." Hearing this, I couldn't help but tighten my fists. I looked at them without saying anything. They urged, "Is it true?" I asked, "What is true? Your mother cheated on her? Who did she cheat on? When you went home, was there no one else present?" I asked coldly, "What do you suspect? Do you suspect that my mother and her lover teamed up to kill my father and my grandmother Alex?" The policeman didn't seem to like my rhetorical question. He snorted and said, "Why do you like to dwell on trivial matters? Kid, it's not impossible. Your father is 180 cm tall and your mother is 160 cm tall. Is it reasonable for her to chop your father's neck with a knife?" "It's reasonable," I replied inferently. "With the height difference. She just hit the neck when she raised her hand. Right? But that place was chopped to pieces. Did your father stand there stupidly for her to chop after being acupunctured? This. I'm afraid no one can judge clearly. Because my mother was too angry. After my father fell, he was chopped many times. If she had more strength and time, it would not be impossible for her to chop him into meat sauce. Aren't you worried that your mother's lover killed them? And then your mother took the blame for the lover?" I said firmly, "My mother didn't cheat. And she didn't have a lover. This is all Leo's accusation. My family used to live in the countryside. And the houses were far apart. People were almost beaten to death. And few people might have heard the shouting. But later, our family bought a house in the county town. And neighbors must have opinions about beating like this every other day. But my father asked, 'This bitch cheated on me. Shouldn't she be beaten? Damn. She flirts with men all day long. Shouldn't she be beaten?' If a male neighbor stepped forward and stopped him once or twice, he would ask, 'Damn. That adulterer is you. Right?' Without waiting for the other party to identify. He would directly threaten with a knife, 'I'll chop you up.' Over time, everyone knew that my mother was cheating. Women stayed away from her, talked about her behind her back, and spit on her. Men also stayed away from her, fearing that they would get into trouble if they had any relationship with her. I said, If you don't believe me, you can go to our hometown in the countryside to investigate. 8's still capable of doing things. I don't need to urge them to go for this little thing. While they were questioning me, the investigators came back and put the relevant information on their desk. The man flipped through it and asked in surprise, "Your father has never had a proper job. Where did you get the money to buy the house in the county town? After your family moved to the county town, your parents didn't seem to find a job. Where did the expenses come from?" I tried to stay calm. "Didn't your colleagues investigate clearly? Will you believe what I say? If you don't believe it, why ask me?" "Alex," the policeman shouted heavily. "Now we are asking us. Please cooperate." I thought about it and said, "I don't know. When I was young, I remember that my parents worked outside. Later, because my grandmother Alex was in poor health, they had to come back to take care of her. Later, my mother worked outside one after another, and my father was always at home. Later, when I grew up, my father probably made a living by playing cards. Most of the money was won at the card table." The policeman snorted and said, "Making a living by playing cards? That's gambling, probably." He paused for a while. "What kind of work?" I shook my head and said, "I don't know. Are you sure?" I said calmly, "I'm sure I don't know." The policeman held up a testimony and said, "This is the testimony of your old neighbors in the countryside. They said that when you were 7 years old, your mother brought a man back from outside and wanted to divorce your father. Do you have any impression?" I still shook my head and said, "I didn't." The policeman shouted, "You're lying. Did your father beat you?" I still shook my head and said, "No. When I was a child, my grandmother Alex protected me and couldn't beat me." "You lied again. In fact, he didn't let me take it off by myself. And my shirt was pulled up." "Oh my God!" the policeman shouted. The policeman hurried over to see, and was also shocked to ask me, how did you get these marks on your back? Such obvious grain marks have not disappeared after working for years. How could it be a fall?" "He also beat you?" After talking for so long, I felt for the first time that the police had a little sympathy for me. That summer, Leo tied me to the stairs and whipped my back with a big whip for driving cattle. My grandma Alex cried and said, "Leo, you are going to beat my precious grandson to death. If I don't beat him, his bitch mother won't come back." He pulled my hair and ordered, "Talk to your mother. Let her come back. Let her roll back." I was stubborn and didn't say anything. But the woman on the other end of the phone screamed, "Xiao Zhang. Xiao Zhang. What's wrong with you? Leo. What are you doing?" Leo roared, "I'll give you 3 days. If you don't come back, I'll beat him to death. And there's my money. If you lose a penny, I'll skin him alive." Mom argued, "That's not your money. That's my hard-earned money. Every penny is my hard-earned money." Leo stopped talking and started whipping me again. I still couldn't help but cried out in pain. My mother compromised and said, "Don't hit me anymore. I'll be back soon. I hate myself so much. Why couldn't I help myself?" I raised my hand to wipe my tears and said infuriately, "When it's normal for a man who commits domestic violence to beat his wife. If he beats her, then he'll beat her. If she doesn't kill her, no one will care." They put my clothes down and got back to the point and said, "So, to your mother, it's normal for you to want to kill her, right?" Avoiding the topic, he sneered and asked, "You don't ask about my mother's love." 9 My mother has no lover that was her salvation. I had only met that man once. He was an ordinary man from another place. He came to kill time in the loneliness. That man was not wrong. Because he thought my parents were divorced. Why? Because Leo sold his wife. I started working outside, and had a business. My dad made up his mind and asked my mom to play a trick on the boss. Unexpectedly, the boss was sincere and promised to give my dad a sum of money as long as he was willing to divorce my mom. This money was enough to save his seriously ill mother from the hell. If he dragged her back, it would be enough for him to enjoy a good life for a while. So, he had a fake divorce with my mother. My mother sold her body to the boss for money. And my father promised to use the money to raise me well. His idea was that the boss would not really love a country girl. And when he got tired of her, my mother could come back. But he didn't know that there is such a thing as love in this world. The boss overcame all difficulties to marry my mother. My mother wanted to combat for a real divorce. So she divorced the boss to my father and gave up my custody. My father was completely panicked. However, he had a trump card. First, legally, they were still a real couple. Second, there was still my son. He could do something stupid. He went to my grandparents' house with a knife, frightened my two little cousins and threatened them that if they dared to agree to my mother's divorce, he would kill the two little cousins and make the Lee family extinct. From then on, my grandparents and uncles completely cut off their relationship with my mother and forbade my mother to visit them again. Later, the boss came to find my mother when he saw that my mother had not returned. He helped find a lawyer to fight the lawsuit. However, he didn't know that some people were worse than pigs and dogs, and even their own sons were just bargaining chips to achieve their goals. Leo threatened my mother with my life. At that time, mobile phones did not have video functions, and he would make terrible screams every few days. My mother was originally "It's me. It's because of me that she keeps coming back to put up with this kind of man. The boss is kind and righteous. Worried that my mom will suffer when she comes back. So he gave my dad nothing in return, only asking my dad to treat my mom well. So, our family got a house in the county town. In the eyes of the people in the village, this is equivalent to a car bleeping over the Dragon Gate. But my mom's life is even more difficult. She can't go out to work, and has to stay at home to take care of the children and the elderly. She has no money, and needs to look at Leo's face even more. He doesn't remember that the two largest sums of money he has in his life were exchanged by my mom. He only remembers that my mom had been with another man during the fake divorce with him. When he was happy, he thought she was unlucky. So he beat her up and scolded her for cheating. If she had any resistance, he would beat me up, in order to let us suffer less. My mother could only accept it and treat being beaten as a daily routine. She didn't fight back, or cry. I just hoped that the beating process will end quickly. She naively thought that as long as we were obedient, our life would be better. He was looking forward to waiting for me to grow up. Unfortunately, it was just a little bit short. I sneered and asked, shouldn't Leo die? Shouldn't my mother kill him? Isn't my mother's behavior considered self-defense? Even if it is not legitimate defense, it is at most excessive defense. Right? My mother asked me to call the police. And she did not run away after the incident. This is considered surrender. Isn't it? You are so persistent. Do you have to sentence her to death? I almost gritted my teeth to say these words. The police asked in a deep voice, if it is just like this, of course it will be considered excessive defense, and she will not be sentenced heavily. But what about your grandma Alex? Your grandma Alex is so old that she can't bear any threats. Why did she chop your grandma Alex? Your grandma Alex's head was chopped off until only the last skin was left. However, there is good news. The police have already believed that my mother killed the person. 10 I told the police. In fact, my mother also hates my grandma Alex very much. When my mother first came to the Chen family as a daughter-in-law, she set a lot of rules for her. In autumn and winter, my grandma Alex likes to soak dirty clothes in cold water the night before, and then let my mother wash them the next morning. The water was cold to begin with. After one night, the surface was frozen. When I put my hand in it, my fingers immediately turned red. The day after my mother gave birth, she was asked to get out of bed and cook. My grandmother Alex said, "Women can't be delicate. Which woman doesn't give birth?" When I was a child, the old people in the village often said that my grandmother Alex was very powerful and could control their daughters-in-law. My grandmother Alex is very smart. As soon as I landed, she knew that I was a bargaining chip, a hostage, and a chain that could make my mother work like a cow or a horse. Every time I called Mom, she would add a bad at the end. When I called Grandma Alex, she would happily follow up with a good. I was white and chubby. So she would ask, Grandma Alex, did you take good care of you? Whenever I had a headache or stomachache, she would blame my mother. How did you take care of the child? When I grew up, Grandma Alex seemed to be more reasonable. She would often persuade my mother after she was beaten, saying, which woman didn't go through this? Just bear it until your son grows up and you become a mother-in-law. And everything will be fine. Your life is much better than mine. When I was in confinement, I said I wanted to eat eggs. And Leo's father threw the raw eggs on the wall and asked me to lick them. Your mother-in-law, and still working hard to take care of your child. But my mother-in-law made me carry the child on her back to plant rice in the fields. Men are trees. Women are vines. You have to rely on your tree to live. If your tree is dead or broken, can you be good? Look at me. Leo's father died. I left him as a widow. Everyone who saw me would praise me a few words. Unlike you, you are still alive after being with another man. Your family members don't associate with you anymore. But our family still needs you. Your man is laughed at for nothing. What's wrong with him hitting you a few times? My grandmother Alex often said to me, your mother is lucky to be born in an open-minded family like ours. Otherwise she would have been thrown into the pig cage long ago. You are a descendant of the Chen family. And the future of the Chen family depends on you. You advised your mother not to cause trouble. But she didn't think about her son. You were so young. But she left you and eloped with another man. You are grown up now. And she is getting more and more restless. Could your father beat her to death? Your father is not an unreasonable person. Who would beat her for no reason? Your father has a hard time. And your mother is just not satisfied. You should be filial to your father in the future. I said to the police, my mother must be particularly resentful of my grandma Alex. So since she wants to block the knife, let her be chopped. At this point, I couldn't help but smile and asked, anyway, she surrendered herself. So she can't be sentenced to death. And I, as the only family member, will definitely sign a letter of understanding. The police were shocked. They couldn't understand how I could say such a thing. Your grandma Alex has 2 daughters. I said infuriately, it's okay. I am my father's son. I have inherited some of his style. I will go to their house with a knife to threaten them. If anyone dares not to sign the letter of understanding, I will chop them to death. If my mother dies, no one wants to live. I threat, and so calmly. However, at this moment, someone came in and said, Captain Yang, Lily committed suicide. 11 Lily is my mother's name. They said that she couldn't stand the police's interrogation again and again. So she bit her tongue to commit suicide. Unfortunately, she didn't succeed. Her tongue was bitten and her mouth was full of blood. But she didn't die. Not only did she not die, but even her speech was not affected much. Waiting for her to be discharged from the hospital. She still needs to be interrogated. I asked in confusion, where are the doubts in the case? Do you have to wait for her to die before you stop asking? The police were in a state of panic. They were also afraid that if my mother succeeded in committing suicide, they would also be responsible. By then, the case would not be solved. And there would be one more life. It would be even more difficult for them to deal with. Soon, a few days later, I was notified to take back the bodies of my father and Alex's grandmother. Of course, they were no longer complete bodies. My grandmother's head was chopped off with only a layer of skin left. My father's neck and abdomen were basically rotten. However, I was not afraid at all. As long as their bodies were sent to the crematorium, burned to ashes, and thrown into the water, everything would be over. Captain Yang, who came with me, said regretfully, I sympathize with your mother and you. But murder is murder. Considering the actual situation of your family, our bureau will bear the cremation expenses of your father and your grandmother Alex. But it will take a long time for this case to go to court. You can go to the university to register first and keep your mobile phone open. When the time comes, you may need to testify in court. I nodded and said, I know. He asked again, have you collected enough tuition for college? According to your situation, you should be able to apply for a student loan. After your mother's verdict, your family's house should be inherited by you. It's not easy to sell or rent it out. So our bureau organized a donation and raised some money for your living expenses. As soon as he finished speaking, I refused and said, I will find a way to pay for my living expenses myself. What I want to do most now is to cancel my account. I said heavily, I want a household registration book with only me and my mother. The team leader and said, this is a tool. You follow the procedure. I thanked him and said, thank you. However, at this moment, a female police officer came over and said excitedly, Captain Yang, there is a case. We found the circuit of Chen's house. This is not a murder by rage. 12. The policewoman set her eyes on me. She took out a supermarket receipt and handed it to Captain Yang, saying, this is a bottle of wine that Alex bought near his tutoring place 3 days before the incident. It was worth 600 yuan, far exceeding his family's normal consumption level. But the bottle of wine was not found at the crime scene. The results of the test have just come out. Alex's grandmother did look like. The body was covered by knife wounds, and the neck was chopped. The cause of death was external trauma, ignoring the injuries that cannot be seen by the naked eye. Captain Yang and other police officers were shocked, and countless eyes were on them. The policewoman continued, because of this bottle of wine, we found a circuit problem at the crime scene, and only then did we think of checking whether the body had been electrocuted. She speculated, I suspect that someone used this bottle of wine as bait, hoping that the victim would be electrocuted to death. The murderer should want to use water for electrical conduction. But the crime scene was covered with blood, and the water was covered. Whether it was damaging the circuit or using wine as bait and conducting electricity with water. This is what a rural woman wanted. The policewoman's sharp eyes finally fell on me. She can do all this. Lily is taking the blame for her son. How did you deal with the wine bottle? Captain Yang didn't want to believe it, but he had to. He put the receipt in front of me, and I asked coldly, can a receipt prove that I bought the wine? I paid in cash. I also looked at that supermarket, and there was no surveillance. There is no surveillance in the supermarket, but there is a bank opposite the supermarket, and the surveillance outside the bank captured his face. Before I asked, the policewoman answered my doubts directly. Also, the family of the student that Alex tutored went out for a trip on the day of the crime, and Alex was caught empty-handed. If Alex only found out about this when he arrived at the student's home, then he really didn't have the time to commit the crime. But assuming he had planned it in advance, even the family's trip that day was planned by him, the purpose was to create an alibi for himself. That was just an 8-year-old elementary school student, and the case had nothing to do with them. The police would not deliberately suspect that the child lied about it, and parents would not let their children get involved in such a thing. And even if we find out this far, the child's, as the policewoman said, he thought so carefully. It is impossible to kill in passion. It is a premeditated and planned killing. How careful was he? Still found a flaw? The bank is separated from the supermarket by such a wide road. How could he still take a picture of the face? Even though everything at this moment was the policewoman's speculation, and could not be used as evidence. Captain Yang still said to me, you can't take the body away for the time being. Come back to the police station with us for investigation now. 13. I turned my neck and vented the emotions that had been suppressed for a long time. The investigation took so long, just to prove that I killed the person. I asked, why is this? Isn't it enough for someone to confess? Why do you have to continue investigating? Curiously asked. Do you police have so much free time? Alex. Captain Yang shouted. Do you know what kind of major criminal case this is? 2 lives were killed by random knives. The circumstances are serious and the impact is great. Domestic violence. The circumstances are not serious. It's not a life. It's not a big impact finally. I lost my temper. Not only that. They had their guns on them before they could react at all. I wanted to take her hostage. But the female police officer was professionally trained after all. So I didn't have such an opportunity. I could only hold the gun against myself and investigate. When my mother was being abused. Why didn't you take it seriously? When my mom was wrongly accused of cheating. Why didn't you pursue the truth? When my mom was beaten to death. Why didn't anyone seek justice for her? Because she didn't have any. Captain Yang panicked and quickly comforted me and said, Alex. Calm down. I have always been calm. But you insisted that I should not be calm. I roared. And I didn't want to pretend anymore. I admitted that I shouted, You are right. I killed the person. It was not a murder of passion. But a premeditated murder. It was a perfect premeditated murder. If the old woman hadn't been idle and wanted to help him serve wine, this would be a perfect case of accidental electrocution. At this point, I couldn't stop crying. But how could a mother love her son so much? It's just a bottle of wine. She is over 50 years old. And you still worry about her being tired? The voltage was enough to kill him. But the old woman's hands were injured. And she wore gloves. She felt the electric shock. But she was not electrocuted to death. Then her son knew it was. If I don't kill him, will I wait for him to kill me? You are curious. Why did you kick his side twice? In order to take the blame for me. They had to destroy this evidence. I really don't understand. I asked them again and again, why are you so careful? My mother was about to commit suicide at that time, but I don't want to be without my mother. We have no other hope. She goes to jail. I go to school. We just hope that we can see each other through the glass window during holidays. Even such a little extravagant hope is not willing to give us charity. Their lives are lives. But our lives are not lives. Leo's life is so precious. Is Lily's life so humble? Are you the man who protects you? I asked them, why is divorce so difficult? The relationship broke down. Can't divorce? Being abused by the family. But also divorced? I went to the Civil Affairs Bureau. And he beat me in public? I went to the hospital with a bruised face and a black eye to check my injuries. But the injury report said it was not even a minor injury. I found the police station. Do you think the Women's Federation should handle this matter? How will they handle it? They only advise fighting at the head of the bed and making up at the foot of the bed, and young couples should think about their children when they grow old. What are you thinking about for the children? What do they want to bring to their children in such a family? My mother and I have no other hope. We just think that when I get into college, we will leave that home and go far away, and never come back. But he didn't want to do that. He tried to tamper with my wishes and not allow me to go so far. He said that wherever my mother goes, he will follow her. My mother had no choice but to say she didn't want to go with me. But what did he say? He said that if I dared not come back after graduating from college, I would be beaten 3 times a day. If I ate supper, I would be beaten 1 more time. As long as I didn't die, no one would care. I just want to kill him. Only when he dies can my mother be free. But I was wrong. The chains on her mother's foot glands have never been mine. I am the lock that prevents her from being free. So, even if my father died, I was guilty. 14, I was too excited and too excited. I finally said everything in my heart. Suppose I beat him to death the first time I hit him with a stick. The police would not have questioned me again and again. Suppose, when I was young, I put rat poison in his bowl. My mother would not have suffered so much. As I was talking, my mother's voice came from a distance. She shouted, Son, don't. Xiaozhan, don't. My son. Don't. The police probably tried to let her persuade me to calm down. But she was even less calm than me. Son. You are my life. Don't do this. It doesn't matter. The lawyer said that there will be no death penalty. Mom will be in jail with you. There will always be a moment when you come out. I just want you to be alive. That's all. Whether you are a college student or a criminal. In my heart. You will always be my good son. She cried and shouted to come over. But two policemen grabbed her. She shouted to the sky and the earth. The sky has not fallen. And my mother is still alive. Teen Yang also advised, Alex. Don't be impulsive. The law is ruthless. But people are kind. The court will judge according to the circumstances. As long as people are alive, there will be hope. The law will give everyone a chance to reform. Maybe. But I didn't commit a crime. Why should I reform? I raised my hand and wiped my tears and said to my mother, Mom. Don't be sad. Don't be upset. Even without me. You have to live well. I don't want to go to jail. I don't want you to watch your son go to jail and be powerless. I don't want you to work hard for me and endure humiliation. I want you to fly. Fly to any place you want to go. I want you to be free. Want to live for yourself. Not be threatened by anyone. And not compromise for anything. I am your son. But I am also his son. But he doesn't deserve a son. He deserves to die a violent death and have no descendants. I shouted, You are Lily. A living person. You are not someone's daughter. Not someone's wife. Not someone's mother. You are yourself. Live. I will be with you in another form. I will become the wind. The rain. A seedling. A flower. A puppy. A cat. And always be by your side. Bang. With the gunshot. Everything was over. The moment I fell to the ground. My soul was finally released. I seemed to see my mother smiling. She smiled so sweetly and happily. And said to me, Baby. Welcome to this world. I am your mother. I am your closest person. I will do everything I can to protect you. Wow. I cried out. If someone can understand my cry. What I said is, No. Woman. You must be yourself first. And then a mother of a child. Extra I am Lily. Today's wind is very soft. The seedlings and flowers are growing well. The kittens and puppies are very well behaved. I am free. So, my child is also free. I am very happy. So, my child is also very happy. I am laughing. He is also laughing.